Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 10 of the Strictly NFL podcast. No Jeff today, but as you guys can see, to the very awesome guy on my right over here, Mr. John Schmeelk, um, we got a fantastic guest today. So, you guys know him from the Giants pre and post games. And yeah, John, how we doing? How much you take from here?
Nah, man, it's good. How you doing? I'm happy to be on with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. So before we get into our football talk, I just want to remind everybody that the Strickland has an Instagram at thestrick.land. The Strickland YouTube is obviously the Strickland, and we have a Patreon, a $3 tier, a $6 tier, and a $9 tier. The full length episode of this podcast is behind the $9 tier. $3 tier gets you access to our Discord where we talk football, basketball pretty much all day, every day, especially on Sundays. I'm in there a lot on Sundays. And the $6 tier for the, I believe, Strickland Roll podcast, which Twin does by himself. So with that stuff out of the way, obviously, big weekend for New York sports and football. Giants Jets, ugly game. Honestly, to me though, I found it pretty entertaining with a lot of the mishaps for both teams in this game. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, certainly a lot to talk about, right? I mean, it was a game where every possession mattered because if you scored, you felt like the other team wasn't going to be able to score to keep up with you. So every point mattered. And look, I think the Giants played it the right way. And, the last 30 seconds came and they allowed a couple big plays. They made a couple critical mistakes, allowed the Jets back into the game, just took advantage of those opportunities. And when you play close games in the NFL, that's what happens, right? Like one or two plays here or there can kind of turn a game at the end, and it turned away from the Giants and towards the Jets.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I've seen a lot of discussion over the Dayball decision to kick the field goal on 4th and 1 near the end of the game. And, I understand Gano's hurt and, X, Y, and Z. He missed earlier apparently from that side of the game of the field in warm-ups. But to me, that's an easy decision, honestly. And I'm not really a guy who loves kicking on 4th and 1. But in that spot, I've seen a lot of criticism about that decision, and I don't agree with the critics. I think that was the right play.
Yeah, I always err on the side of being aggressive too, and I thought their longer field goal in the first half, I think it was 47 yards. I would have considered going for it on that one. And at the
Yeah,
time we talked about it, Jonathan Casillas and I talked about it at halftime on the air. But look, it's a 35-yard field goal. You make that kick. I know game not technically over, but game over. I mean, the Jets aren't going the length of the field to score a touchdown in 20 seconds with no timeouts. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So I had no problem kicking the field goal there. I understand the argument the other way. I don't think it's a grand slam decision every time type of deal. I could see both arguments to go both ways. Coin toss maybe. So I get why people are upset about that, but I'm with you. Look, you have a field goal kicker like Graham Gano, and I know he struggled this year. He has a leg injury, all that stuff. You have to, if he's going to be active for you and he's going to be your kicker, you have to trust him to make a 35-yard kick. And he talked after the game. He said, look, I got to make it. And
yeah.
he has to make it. I mean, I don't know what else you're supposed to do. But a 35-yard kick is like a 90% play in the National Football League, maybe 95%. And converting a 4th-and-1 is not. So I think it's really that simple.
Yeah, unless you're the Eagles nowadays, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason for the hesitancy to go on those plays is probably the fact that we ran earlier and JMS got hurt. I mean, I don't agree with that kind of idea because injuries are pretty random, and I usually subscribe to that thinking. I don't really like the term injury prone, even though I've seen it thrown around a lot for Aziz recently. But yeah, I mean, I think if the excuse for not going for it with the tush push is you don't practice it a lot, I think you should maybe throw it in once or twice, at the end of a week or something. Like, the guys don't go nuts. We're just gonna simulate this a little, just practice it slow. Don't kill nobody.
Yeah, I mean, even just do a traditional quarterback sneak then, right? Or you
Yeah,
could give it to Saquon Barkley. You could pick either one of those two. And the Giants in 3rd-and-1s this year have actually been pretty good. I think they're on 80, like maybe an 80% conversion rate, something like that. So they've actually been pretty good
yeah.
on 3rd-and-1s. But
I believe it
last
was 79. Sorry to cut you off.
79, yeah, that sounds
Something
about
like
right.
that.
But the last couple weeks, I'm guessing it's because of all the moving parts on the offensive line, and they were stopped on 3rd-and-short 3 times. I believe it was the Buffalo game 3 weeks ago. And since then, Brian Dable, I feel like, has not been as confident in trying to convert some of those 3rd-and-1s. Maybe now with Daniel Jones coming back, The offensive line, knock on wood, look like it finally is starting to get healthier. And with Saquon back a couple weeks, maybe they're going to start having a little bit more confidence trying to convert some of those third and shorts.
Yeah, I like where you took this conversation, right? I'm an O-line guy. I played O-line when I was playing football, so you could tell by my name, in the bottom corner. Please save us, Andrew Thomas. It's been ugly. It's been real bad. But I'm very cautiously optimistic of how this line's going to shape up once he comes back. I think, whether you put Pugh at left guard or right guard, and Bredesen obviously fills the second guard spot. There's a decision to be made at right tackle, right, with Tyree Phillips and Evan Neal. Even though I personally would just go Neal.
That's what I think they'll do, by the way. I think when Neal's out, they'll go back in there. And I think it'll be – and if it's me, by the way, I would put Glowinski in one of the guard spots. He's been very good since he struggled against Dallas week 1. It was a disaster.
Yeah.
But since he's come back the last few weeks, I honestly think he's been their best offensive lineman. So I would have as much as Pugh has helped them, and I like his veteran presence, I would have a hard time taking Glowinski out of the lineup. But I do think that's an interesting conversation. With Schmidt's back, if Thomas comes back, who are your two guards? And I'm very curious. I'm not sure what they're going to do, to be honest with you. I'm curious to see how they choose between Bredesen, Glowinski, and Pugh in that spot.
Yeah, I think he's been pretty great in the past game, which is not something I thought I would be saying.
In the Glowinski?
Yeah, Glowinski.
Yeah, he's been fantastic. It's unbelievable.
And it gives me kind of a weird feeling with him and Neal on the right side, because when Neal and him are in there together, I brought this up on an earlier episode of the podcast, they can never communicate. That's what it seems. And then when there's Glowinski in there, just, without Neal next to him, he plays much better. When
I
Neal's
wonder
in there
if Glowinski tries to do a little bit too much to help Neal. And I wonder if that's part of him trying to do a little bit more than what his job is. He sees Neal out there. He's maybe having some issues, young player. He might be trying to do a little bit too much out there, but I think you're seeing it the right way.
Yeah, and I also feel like it kind of goes both ways. Like when Glowinski wasn't there week 2, or maybe it was week 3, but there was a couple of weeks where I thought Neal was improving with McKeithen next to him.
That was week 2 against Arizona, I believe, is what.
Yeah, so it's just a weird dynamic, and I think the best version of this Giants line is both of them getting on track together on that right side.
Yeah.
But we'll see how it plays. It's going to be interesting because they have big commitments to both of those guys.
Yeah, and I Glowinski, I think you can get out of his deal after this year if you want. It's a small cap hit, I think. I have to double check that. But if he's on a 3-year deal, he's already served 2 of them. So usually that last year, you can get out of that with minimal pain. But look, and Evan Neal has to play better too, right? I mean, he just has to be more consistent. He has to not let guys beat him around the edge. Then he started watching the edge more. He started getting beat inside more. He got to take advantage of some bull rush and some power in there because he's so worried about the edge. And this week, look, this is not the week you want to come back because Max Crosby is a freaking – and I will quote Justin Pugh today when I talked to him about it. His first words out of his mouth, Max Crosby is a maniac. That's the word he used. He called him a maniac.
Yeah.
The guy plays 97% of the Raiders' defensive plays as a defensive end. For fans that don't understand how insane that is insane. You look at the league leaders in snap counts on defense. It's hard to find, but I can access it. He is him and Aiden Hutchinson are the only 2 defensive linemen of like the first 20 guys on the list. Everyone else is middle linebackers that don't leave the field or defensive backs that don't leave the field.
Yeah.
Defensive linemen simply do not do that. His motor is unbelievable. He's a great athlete. He's long. He's tough. He's violent. He almost always lines up over the right tackle around 80-90% of the time. So whoever plays right tackle this week, God bless and good luck.
Yeah, I think the motor there is the biggest part of what you're talking about. Obviously, he's, if people don't watch Max Crosby, he's elite with his hands and his swipes and whatnot, but he doesn't he'll get around the edge, quarterback will step up, and then he's still the first guy to get into that quarterback, even after they, adjust their place in the pocket. So it's going to be hard. It's also probably, I understand the Jets this week and then the Cowboys the next week, but it's a bad kind of, how in baseball when you have the starter, they try to like funnel you into 3 batters where they think you can succeed and kind of get through the inning.
I do.
It's a pretty tough stretch of pass rushes for Daniel Jones to come back against, whether it was last week, this week against the Raiders and the next week against the Cowboys, I believe. So
Yeah, and look, then you get the Commanders after that, and now they don't have their two defensive ends, so that's a little bit of a break. And other than Crosby, and look, I think you got to put a tight end over there. Daniel Bellinger's got a chip. You got to put a running back over there. He's got a chip, and you have to help and let the other guys all go one-on-one. I think you roll the dice there because no one else is really much of a pass rush threat at all, to be quite honest with you. So I just think you got to help on that side, and at the very least, next week's going to be a mess because Dallas, I mean, if you watched them beat up the Rams last week, Matthew Stafford just got the, what beat out of him all game. And Dallas does that to pretty much everybody that's not the 49ers. So next week's going to be tough. But then you get Washington, you get New England. Those aren't too bad. You come back, you get New Orleans and Green Bay, not the worst. So, then the Eagles come back down the pike, obviously, and, they're always tough. But look, going into this year, a point I made on Big Blue Kickoff Live a lot was that the Giants, according to a lot of the analytic models, face the toughest pass defense schedule in all of football, which combines secondary coverage and pass rush. And I think we've seen that early, right? They've just faced so many elite defenses, and the Giants had the worst possible injuries, the worst possible spots against those matchups. And I think that's kind of that's the reason they're averaging 11 points per game, which is obviously disastrous.
Yeah, I think a lot of the conversation is, or at least a lot of the conversation that I've heard is, Joe Shane didn't adjust the line. Joe Shane didn't get us weapons. Joe Shane, XYZ. And I'm trying to separate my actual analysis from, being a big fan of Joe Shane. And all I'm thinking is, like, he drafted Evan Neal. I would have done nothing different. Evan Neal, to me, was a slam dunk. Glowinski, love him or hate him, I thought he was a solid signing. Drafted 2 guards in Azudu McKeithen. Drafted JMS. I don't know how anybody can say he ignored this line.
Yeah, you can make the argument that he didn't.
Sure.
You can make the argument he didn't execute the plan well enough, right? And maybe he picked guys that they wouldn't pick. But I'm with you. Like, Evan Neal was my number 1 tackle that year. I was thrilled when he dropped him.
Agreed.
I had him ahead of Aquanu. I had him ahead of Charles Cross. I've been a little baffled by how much he struggled in his first year and a half, to be honest with you. Hopefully he can figure it out the way Andrew Thomas did. None of that's guaranteed. Obviously, every player is different. But no, they've put resources into the line. I got these same arguments and phone calls from fans 5 years ago, and they're like, the Giants never addressed the offense. I'm like, no, they did. Look, they drafted Justin Pugh in the first round. They drafted Eric Flowers in the first round. They drafted Weston Richburg in the second round. Then you go down the list. It's just that the guys didn't work out, right? So there's a difference between guys not working out and not addressing it. And I do think they addressed the offensive line. But to your point, 2 weeks ago, I believe it was the Bills game, when they went to that game and they rolled out their offensive linemen. They had 9 players that played offensive line on their initial 53-man roster. 9. 3 were left healthy in that game against the Bills. 3 out of 9. That's a 67% attrition rate. I mean, there is not a team in the sport that can survive that.
Exactly.
And be effective on the offensive line.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree. And, it's not just that 6 of them got hurt, right? It's that 6 of them got hurt, 1 being, in my opinion, the second best, maybe third best left tackle in the sport.
Yeah, of course.
So it's not a 1-to-1 comparison. The Niners lost Trent Williams for 1 week. Look how it bothered them, right? So another big point, viewing point in this game for me was Banks and Garrett Wilson. I know Wilson finished the game 100 yards in total. I think he had about 71 of those in coverage, or beating Banks in coverage. But for the most part, I thought Banks' highs were high and I thought his lows were lows, and that's pretty consistent with who he's been. It gives me no reason to kind of, be against him or think that performance was bad.
Yeah, I thought it was the same thing against Terry McLaurin the week before, right? And when you're going to ask a guy to play a lot of man-on-man, press-man coverage, I think that's what you're going to get, right? You're going to get a lower completion rate, but I think some of those completions are going to be back-breaking plays sometimes. And you saw that against Washington. McLaurin had those 2 30-yard catches. And we saw Garrett Wilson make those big catches in that game. Now, that 29-yarder over the middle, they're funneling him to the middle there. That's not a Deontay Banks problem. That you want him to catch the ball in the middle of the field there. Let the clock run. The problem is that Kayvon Thibodeau went offsides and the clock didn't run. So I'm not going to get on Banks for that. I think the biggest criticism for me of Banks, and I think he knows this, is that he's committed 6 penalties already this year. 3 of them have been accepted. He's very grabby down the field.
Yeah.
He generally, except for that 1 interception, and remember, he was in zone coverage on that. He wasn't playing man. When he plays man coverage, he does not get his head around and locate the football. He tends to face guard and he tends to grab. And we saw that against Garrett Wilson on that slant last week over the middle when he, held his back arm down. And a lot of times he's in such a good position, he doesn't have to grab.
Exactly.
But he just, it's just part of his physicality. And he doesn't have that 5-yard mental thing in his head yet where he knows to stop doing stuff at 5 yards. He'll just do it 8 yards and 9 yards. And frankly, I think he's gotten away with 2 or 3 this year that weren't even called. So that's something he's going to have to clean up because teams will see that on tape. And if you don't think if the Raiders are watching this week and they're like, oh, well, if we get Devontae Banks on if you get Deontay Banks on Devontae Adams one-on-one with no help, they're just going to throw it to Adams and trust him to either make a catch or draw a penalty. And they'll do that again and again and again. If the Giants choose to put him on man-to-man coverage there, my guess is they're going to do a lot of double teaming, which I think would make a lot of sense, but we'll see how they handle that.
Yeah, and that was probably the biggest knock on his prospect profile coming out of Maryland. That and the kind of lack of zone coverage that he played over there. But you've seen it, right? It's also funny that it's a pretty blatant flag when he commits them too.
Oh, it's not even close.
Yeah, so that, but the reason why I bring this up is because the fact that they trust him to play man, obviously he's a first-round pick and all that stuff, that speaks volumes to me. So, he's getting beat now. I think going forward, year 2, year 3, or 4, this stuff is not going to be something that we, come back and keep harping on. At least I don't think so. But
this is teachable stuff, right?
Exactly. Yes.
If he was getting beat or he wasn't physical enough, and those are things that you're all right. Well, can we teach that to him? I'd much rather pull a guy back than have to get him to do more. So I agree with you. Some guys don't figure it out, but I think the coaching here with Jerome Henderson is good enough in the secondary that they'll figure it out. Long-term, I'm not worried about him, but short-term, teams figuring out what his weaknesses are this year, you could have some more issues, but I'm with you. Long-term, I'm not worried at all.
Yeah, and the Giants' defensive staff in general, from Andre Patterson with the D-line, Jerome Henderson with the DBs, I believe John
Egrogu.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Sorry for butchering that. Yeah, it's a tough one, but with the linebackers,
and then you have Drew Wilkins too, who does the edge guys. He's very good.
Yeah, so I speak so highly of this defensive staff. Yeah, I wish I could say the same for the offense. But as now that you bring up Drew Wilkerson, the technique I've seen from Kayvon on the edge with his hands is day and night from week 1 to week 2.
Yeah, he's actually won a couple times outside, right? And it's not because of burst and bend. He's been good getting hands off of him, right? And I think we saw that once against Miami, I think, or was it Washington? I think it was Washington. Miami had the 2 inside moves where he won. Washington had the 1 outside move where he won. Then he had 2 this past week against the Jets. And he won inside a couple times early in the year, but you're right, we weren't seeing him win outside. I think he has because he's kind of gotten that swipe and rip thing going, which has worked well.
Yeah, and this isn't necessarily, an outside move, but the move he put on Max Mitchell, I know that's, it takes a lot of time and you really want to win fast on the edge, but that move he put on Max Mitchell was sick, and really showcased all of the agility that you saw at Oregon, the first step, the quickness, and just showed he can win in a phone booth in this league. And a lot of the talk week 1 to week 4 about, lack of production, it was just talk.
It is funny, though. He had 2 sacks against Washington. Those were his only 2 pressures in the game. Then he had the 3 sacks against the Jets, and those were his only 3 pressures.
Yeah.
So now that's gonna normalize now, right? No one has that type of sack conversion rate from pressure to sacks. That's just not going to stay there because look, and I talked about this with Kayvon over the summer when we did one of our John Tuttle podcasts, and we were talking about it, and we just had a discussion like getting a sack is very much out of the player's control, right? Mm-hmm. You can win, get there, the quarterback gets the ball out. There's nothing you can do. So the fact that he's getting all these sacks, I think the same way he had some bad luck last year not getting sacks, he's had some good luck this year getting sacks, right? I think it's kind of flipped for him a little bit. So I would not be surprised if this pace slackened a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's not being productive, right? Because, again, sacks are out of players' controls a little bit.
Yeah, and, 8.5 sacks through less than half of the season, right? he's not going to finish with 18 and a half sacks, whatever he's on pace for. At least I don't think. But a lot of that to me is I think Kayvon is in a position to overperform his analytics because of the presence of Dexter Lawrence.
Agreed. No, I'm with you. Look, people talked about Thibodeau's sacks in that game against the Jets, and rightfully so. He was great, made some real big plays, and he should have had the game-clinching sack, right, if it wasn't for the other stuff we already talked about after that. But that was as dominant a defensive performance from Dexter Lawrence as I've ever seen.
Yeah.
That guy was in the backfield on every single passing snap. The first Jet center, killed him. Second Jet center, killed him. Third Jet center,
fumble.
And it was every guy. They threw three guys at him, and he killed them all. He had 3-person body count, and he killed him, and no one could stop him.
Yeah,
he was just as dominant against Washington. He was very good in that game too. So when a quarterback's getting pressured, you can run the hoop around. If you're a defensive end, you kind of get pushed back into it. The quarterback has nowhere to step up into the pocket to escape you. So agree 100%. Having that inside rush, if you're an outside rusher, it really makes all the difference.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I'm such a big advocate for Azeez to not really get, for more or less of a better term, run out of town by this fan base for being hurt. I think Azeez is as good of a pass rusher right now as Kayvon is, in my opinion.
I think Kayvon's a better overall player. I think Ojulari is actually a better pure pass rusher, to be honest.
Yeah, so I'm really hoping that he can put some healthy games together and we can kind of put an end to that narrative. But I can't, last year, that 4 D lineman unit of Dex, Leo, Kayvon, Azeez, even though Leo's obviously gone, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, they were, by multiple stats, the best defensive line in football. And with the improvement that Kayvon to me has made in run defense this year, specifically after week 3, you've been able to notice it a lot. I think, Jordan Riley is the guy who I really like as a project. And I think DJ Davison has shown a lot, out of the potential Leo replacements to kind of step up and fill that role.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what they do on passing downs, right? Because, Nacho and Ashawn, they're more run stoppers, not really pass rushers. So
yeah.
Who's going to be that? Are they going to maybe they'll move Jihad Ward inside to the 3 tech when they go to try to rush the passer? I think that's possible. DJ Davidson, I think, is another possibility. I think he's probably a little bit further along as a pass rusher than Jordan Riley is. So I am curious to see what they do in terms of getting that 4th pass rusher on the field in some of those sub packages.
Yeah, I saw Jihad a good bit in the 3 tech this week when they were dropping Isaiah Simmons down to the edge.
Yep.
And they had Okereke mugged up at the line. So, look, Leo is, I think, in large part underrated by parts of this fan base nowadays. Sure. But the Giants have the bodies to replace him, specifically on early downs, as you said, with Ashawn and Nacho. And I guess we could just kind of talk about the trade a bit in terms of value. Sure. I think.
No, it's a home run.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple people be like, you don't want to cost Dex an all-pro spot by taking away his partner, and I'm like,
you make the trade.
I'm like, are we talking about accolades or are we talking about building a program?
Right. Like we were having this discussion a couple weeks ago. A couple fans called up Big Blue Kickoff Live and were like, oh, you got to make these trades now. My point was, look, see how the Washington game goes, see how the Jet game goes. If you can win both those games, you're in the mix, and then maybe you don't make a move, right? If you're sitting there at 3-5, right now, I think the last NFC wildcard spot might be an 8-9 team, to be honest with you. It's pretty ugly when you look at the past the top 5 teams in the conference. But I got to be honest with you, even at 3-5, that was such a high return for Leonard Williams. I might have made the trade anyway, to be totally honest with you, because I was thinking a 4th round pick, even with picking up the money, to be honest with you, and to get a 2 and a 5 home run. I mean, they got more back for him than they traded for him, and he's 3.5 years older. I mean, it's a no brainer.
Yeah, and it's not like they didn't get service, right? Like they got 3 legitimately really good years out of the guy.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and to me, this also sparks. I think most people would call me a Daniel Jones fan. I think I just try to be as neutral as I can on our quarterback. I think this opens up a whole can of worms for the Giants potentially trading up. I think it made it 100 times more likely.
I mean, you certainly have more ammunition, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and Joe Shane has not been afraid to move and groove in the draft either. So I think, and we're going to start getting these calls too on our shows in house. And my answer is going to be very similar. You have 9 games here to figure out what you're going to do, and you let it play out. You don't have to make that decision now. I gave the same answers last year when people after 5-6 weeks, they're trying to decide what you want to do on Daniel's contract in the offseason. My answer is always, you don't need to decide that now. You need to figure that out at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So you'll have a whole lot more data coming your way, and, you'll figure that out when you get there because, look, this schedule's not the toughest. You've gotten past the toughest part of it. We kind of talked about that already. I mean, there's a path here to 7-8 wins, in which case it's going to be hard to get to where you want to go.
Yeah.
Even if you're at 6 wins, right, to get where you want to go in terms of if you're in I'm not saying I am, but if you're in the neighborhood of trying to go get a quarterback, there's enough teams that are going to have worse records than you that need a quarterback that aren't going to wait and trade back or have a better chance to trade up. So that could be tough anyway.
Yeah, and we play a few of them, right? We play the Patriots. We play the Packers. We're going to play the Raiders this upcoming week.
Even the Saints might want a young quarterback at some point, right?
So, to me, that is also a reason why you don't trade Saquon, right? Not only because you want to evaluate quarterback, but you want to evaluate Wandale, in a legitimate offensive scheme for once. You want to evaluate Hyatt in a legitimate offensive scheme. JMS, you don't want him to just be getting 35 plays on offense a game because we can't stay on the field, right? So, to me, the conversation for a guy like Saquon goes past what we can get, right? I hear people, with the face of the franchise stuff. I get that. But I think removing Saquon kind of hinders a lot more development than removing Leo Williams does for the defense.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, the analytics say quality of running back does not impact play action. I watch with my eyes on coaches tape every Monday morning how teams reacted to the Giants play action game without Saquon and with Saquon. It's night and day. I mean, you saw guys on the weak side of that defensive line not even go down the line after the running back and just go after the quarterback on those play action boots. Like, they just did not care. Like, you want to run it? Go ahead. We don't care. Don't care. When Saquon's in the game, it's different. It's a different equation. And he almost had a receiving touchdown against the Jets if C.J. Mosley doesn't knock that ball down at the line of scrimmage. I mean, he's wide open. That is a touchdown. On tape, trust me, it's a touchdown. And he's the one player on offense, even with their younger guy and the other receivers they had in the offseason. Now Darren Waller's going to be out for multiple weeks. We'll see what that means exactly. But he's a headache, and player and other teams have to game plan for him. And we've seen the fairly large sample size of Daniel Jones's numbers with Saquon versus without, and there's a difference. He's much better when Saquon's on the field. So with the way the Giants offense is structured and the players that they have, he certainly makes a difference. And if he's not out there, you're right. I think evaluating this offense becomes much, much tougher.
Yeah. Just to touch on some of the Jet side of things.
Yeah.
I am probably as big of a fan as you'll find of Breece Hall. I think he is the quintessential 3-down running back. First down, second down, can run through your face.
Too. He's great.
And then third down, I mean, he's a natural pass catcher. So
except for that one drop against the Giants.
Yeah.